In this video, we'll expose a trap many automation engineers fall into, discover some ways that you can avoid it, and improve the quality of your test by exposing it. Hello, this is Greg Paskal. I'm here with Craft of Testing, and I'm excited to help our community grow and bring the very best tips I know to our community. Several years ago, I developed a superpower of sorts. No capes were necessary, no tight-fitting clothes at all. Just the ability to ask one simple question: was I going for green? What I had stumbled onto in this simple declaration was a trap I realized that nearly all automation engineers and even test engineers stumble into. And that desire is that our test passed at any cost at all. So what were you working on the last few weeks? Maybe writing some new automation, maintaining a framework. I know I was. Troubleshooting things like locators, page object locators, test scripts. I bet, all of that had some challenge to it, and it was time consuming, and it required some concentration to get stuff just, done, right? Throughout each week, I get this great chance to coach my automation team. These are some of the best test engineers I know within my company, and they need to be in order to join our automation team. And this is for a really good reason. Developing test automation, guess what? It's not like developing software. Now, I know a lot of you are hearing, hey, I've read to develop automation is just software development. I disagree with that. I think when you approach it like that, you miss some of the best things that test engineers that transform into automation engineers get to bring to the table. Did Greg really say that? Did he say that test automation development is different than software development? Yeah, I did. Developing test automation first requires a foundation of sound testing practices, something most application developers are not trained to do. And that's no, dig to the application developers. It's just a difference in the crafts of what we do. Being an automation engineer requires what we build actually test something, and that it's simply not pass. And this is a trap that developers get caught into, and this is a trap that test automation engineers can get caught into as well. Yet, when we're all under the gun, we can forget that we are first testers. Even test engineers lose sight of this sometimes, and all they want to do is get through the test cases. Well, guess what? An automation engineer can fall into the same exact problem, and before you know it, they're doing everything they can to get test automation to execute, to run and complete. And they begin to take their eyes off the ball of, is this testing something at the end of the day? So we can err on the side of getting our test to pass without getting our test to test. I want to say that again. We as automation engineers can get our eye off the ball of, does this automation test anything? And we get our focus switched on, this automation has to pass. There's really a fine line between there, but it's an important distinction, and it's the reason why great test automation engineers need to be great test engineers first, so they don't lose sight of that. When this happens, when we begin to focus on creating passing test, not testing test, I call this go for green. And we're really going to talk about that today, and I think this may be one of my most beneficial talks to the automation community that I've done up to this point. I want you to remember these words: go for green. You could even think of a little gopher coming out of his hole, a green gopher, if that helps you. We actually do that at my team. But go for green is this idea that we begin to pursue passing test over testing test. We begin to pursue, this has got to pass, this has got to go green, versus this has got to test something. And it's a mindset that we can slip into in many places. So I've got a couple of them here I want to talk about. It could be that pesky test, the one that you've tweaked and it just keeps failing anyway. And you're like, man, I'm ready to move on, and I'm ready to, get on to some other cool, work, and I can't get this test to pass. And before you know it, your mind has made this switch. Hey, by the way, I'm busted. This even happens to me. And my team knows they can call me on it. And they're like, did you go for green on this? I'm like, busted. I totally did. It happens this fast. So we get so caught up, like in this case, I've got a test maybe I'm having to refactor, or some updates happen to the test case. And before you know it, my mind gets totally locked into the fact that I've got to get this done and moved on to the next thing. And before you know it, I begin to compromise the tester in me to go ahead and go into the developer in me, which says, I know how to make this pass. And in that quick, split second, I've compromised on what it means to be a test engineer. And it happens. What about the complicated automation that you just want to be done with already? Sometimes I get into something that's really hard and I might work on it for days. Maybe I'm even not sleeping well because I'm worried, am I ever going to figure this out? If we're upfront and honest with one another, most of us have been there. We're like, man, the boss needs me to get this done and I need to move on. That could be the time we compromise being a great test engineer and we go into like full-on developer mode, and we lose the sight that we need to first be test engineers and not compromise the quality of the test and what the thing is testing. Some of the things that can slip in are you begin to, you get in this mindset of what was it supposed to test anyway? Or you get like, I'm bored. I'm ready to move on and do something different. And this one little thing is going to make it so it's done and you can get on to things. And that's where we begin to compromise as test engineers. So again, if you're an automation engineer, I'm going to always encourage you, you need to be a world-class, great test engineer before you really move into the role of automation engineer. Some of you started an automation engineer, and I'm really happy that you got into that role. For you, I think it's going to be harder, and I would encourage you to go back and get your chops as a great test engineer. Spend time sitting with some of your best test engineers, your manual test engineers, and learn the craft of testing, okay? Sometimes we can slip into this go for green mindset when the boss keeps asking like, hey, is that test done yet? Is the automation working yet? And then they begin to maybe suspect, is this automation stuff even worth having around? And that can get us like, oh my gosh, now my job's in jeopardy. I better just get this, to pass and be done and move on. You might have heard me talk about in previous videos that the role of a quality engineer, which is what you and I are, quality assurance engineers, right? We do that by testing software, and we do that by writing automated tools that test software, or at least give us data and metrics that we can make analysis from. But we can fall into this in this mindset that we're worried that the automation isn't worth it anymore. And so we begin to go ahead and just make a bunch of automated tests that really don't test a lot, okay? The role of a quality engineer requires a great deal of integrity to do well. And for those of you that are in leadership in this space, that should be something you really look for when you're hiring quality engineers, is you've got to have folks that have great integrity. So in the interview process, you should be asking them about questions when maybe someone put the pressure on and said, hey, I need you to get these test cases done. And they weren't able to push back and say, I can't be rushed to do this. If you want me to do a good job, I need this much time to get to the point where I can tell you whether it's done or not. You want to hear things that let you know you have someone that has integrity enough that they can say the hard thing when it needs to be done. And they also can adjust when they can't finish up all the test cases and are able to communicate things like, I didn't get as much time to do what I wanted to do. All these things can lead to a go for green mindset, even for manual test engineers, but it happens really often to automation engineers, unfortunately. So lots of times we get into this place of pressure and we slip out of the tester mindset and we go into application developer mindset, problem solving mindset, okay? That's the distinction between being an application developer and a test developer, is you're really not solving problems like an application developer is, where they're creating a feature and a function. If you begin to look at your automation as problem solving, you will slip out of that mindset easily from the point that this is supposed to test something at the end of the day. Now, this is no disrespect again for our developer friends. We need you all. But there's a reason we have distinct and different roles. Look, at developers develop features. Testers exploit features. Developers troubleshoot problems. Testers discover problems. Developers architect solutions. Testers find weaknesses in those solutions. Don't lose the differentiation between this. Right? The DevOps model is wanting to blur this line more. I'm just not a big fan of it. I think they need to be distinctive, different disciplines that we both specialize in. And while the quality engineer may coach the team into it, we can't lose that quality-minded individual being on that team who owns the quality of that project. And it's nice to say, everybody owns quality. That's a cliche that's nice to roll off the tongue. It's another thing to genuinely bring to the table. So don't lose sight of that in all the hype with DevOps right now. That can happen. Now, I want to share today some tips that can avoid the go for green type of thinking. Expose this trance-like state that sneaks up on automation and test engineers. So here's the first one. You got to be vulnerable when it happens to you. You got to be able to share with your other automation engineers and your team, busted, I just slipped into go for green. There's nothing more powerful than a leader of a team who could be vulnerable when something's got hosed up and messed up. That has a great influence on the team to say, you know what, if this person can share that, then I can too. Hey, I messed up as well. And we're able to course correct and learn from it and say, all right, well, how did that happen? And let's make a change and let's do things differently the next time. There's no shame in a team for asking, is this go for green? My automation team asked this probably weekly of one another. We'll come together and analyze a problem or something we're trying to solve. And then one of them will all of a sudden say, hey, are we starting to slip into go for green here? I love it when they bring that up because it means they're thinking like a test engineer. They're thinking about someone who's assessing risk and quality. And we can actually introduce more risk by going for green because it's like we're pretending we're testing something and we're not at all. So also recognize when go for green is most likely to happen. So here's a couple of them that can bring this thing up. You're under the gun to get something done, all right? When you're under that pressure, that's when it tends to sneak up on you. The end of the day or the week, and you just want to wrap some stuff up. Maybe the pressure to create some sort of meaningless test or automation cases. I call these automation fire drills. They're usually, good intentions. Something broke, and you get these words. This bad thing happened. We don't want it to ever happen again. So can you automate this? I mean, if you don't have one of those showing up once a week or once a month, I would be surprised. That's a classic automation fire drill, and it can lead you to this wild goose chase of creating things that nobody really needs in the long run, but in the moment it's a pain point, and it generally got brought up. It's a good time to let those cool usually and give them a week or two to level out. In most cases, they go away unless there's something really, really important there that you can do something for, but that can lead to this go for green mindset. What happens if you're incentivized, like your performance is based on the number of automation test cases or even manual test cases you built? That's an awful way for a quality engineer to be measured in their success, and it will lead to some pretty bad things in the long run, some bad habits of them creating more tests than are necessary or tests that don't test anything. And it encourages this problem of kind of checking their integrity at the door and saying, all right, well, if you want a lot of tests, I'll just run a whole bunch of garbage and I'll get rewarded for that and everybody will be happy. You need to promote sound testing. Remember that testing identifies risk. Don't lose sight of that our role as quality engineers, as test engineers, as automation engineers is to identify risk. We use all of these disciplines in the space of quality assurance to be risk identifiers, not test case runners, not automation developers. But if we don't perform that role, we've really missed the basic reason why we've been brought into the company to begin with. Test engineers are subject matter experts in the craft of testing. I encourage you in this often. I mean, I've created a whole YouTube channel around craft of testing because this is a craft worthy to pursue. It's a cool craft, and it's something that we can do well and define. You can't get a degree in quality assurance. You can't get a degree in test automation. It's still a young field, but we can shape it into something respectable and honoring and a science to be pursued and developed over time. I love this part of what we get to do. Test automation development and application development are different disciplines. Even in the quality world, you're going to hear people say, it's just software development. Wrong. That is not what test automation is. And when you hear that, you begin to look at it like a software developer, and you begin to pursue things like clean code with no comments in it. Well, for Pete's sake, put some comments in your code so when someone has to maintain your test code, they know what you were trying to test. That's not such a great solution for automation engineers at all. So things that you might hear from like Bob Martin on clean code practices, I actually don't think apply an enormous amount of that on my automation. That's great for a developer, but in application development, but I really don't apply those practices a lot of my automation. And maybe a dev would look at that and say, well, you repeated this code twice there. Well, I did that so it would be clear what we're testing, because these are different disciplines. So there's no shame in being an automation engineer. Maybe you wanted to get into dev and this is the role you got into. Well, pursue it well. Did you know that role pays exactly the same in most cases? You should find that an automation developer role or an automation engineer role should pay the same as an application developer role. If they're not, then you need to talk to your leadership and them realize you're bringing a very valuable skill set to the table. You should be getting paid the same. So let's kind of wrap things up here. Go for green is jeopardizing a test so that it will pass no matter what. And it often comes at the cost of quality. Be aware that stress can lead to go for green thinking. And give your team permission to ask this big question: are we going for green? Don't dumb things down. I know the idea that everyone is a tester. Recognize and pursue testing as a subject matter expert, as a SME. Like, pursue it, guys. Remember that there is a craft to our work. Represent our test engineering community, with excellence and integrity. So you set the expectation of what people should expect when they hire a guy like me or like you, a person like you with these skills. Are you going to represent someone who just wants to get as many things automated as possible? Or are you going to represent someone who takes the time to engineer an automated test that raises awareness to risk? Man, that's the person I want on my team. That's the person I want to hire right there, is someone who does not lose track of the fact that we are risk assessors and we use tools, and it's really fun and it's hard work at times, and it's something to be pursued well. Well, I'll leave you with this. Discuss with your team this coming week. We're about to kick off a new year. I don't know when you're going to see this video, but we're about to turn over to 2022. And this is a really great time to sit with your team and say, hey, let's talk about this thing called Go for Green. And give them permission to ask the hard question and add this to the vocabulary. So I want to encourage you, check out the show notes in the description, and I'd love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I've got some cool craft of testing shirts and stuff like that. If you want, you can find them at shop.craftoftesting.com. Anyway, this is Greg Paskal. I'm signing off today. I want to encourage you to pursue the craft of testing well, and thanks for watching today. Bye-bye. I would love to connect with you, so feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find at Greg Paskal on LinkedIn. For those of you who are in the automation world, take a look at my book, Test Automation in the Real World. You can find more about that at realworldtestautomation.com.